Why don't we, to start with, why don't we actually just give people the encouragement to go into chat and tell us where you're calling in from, where are we tapping into right now, and just so we have a sense of where people are coming from, because we've had people from, I think, maybe 8 or 10 different countries on the call in the last 4 weeks. This is our 5th happy hour with Chip and David, or David and Chip. And I, generally speaking, it's sort of well suited for American time zones. But sometimes people call in from Europe and Asia, and certainly Latin America. So thank you for throwing up. Thank you for throwing up. No, that's how it sort of felt lately, right? I don't know about other people here, but I have felt a soul ache. You know what a toothache is?
What's a soul ache?
What's a soul ache?
What's a soul ache, Chip?
Okay. Thank you, Tom. I'm gonna mute you.
No, I'm off already. No way.
I just muted myself. We'll mute. So Barbara, just so you know, Tom was the president of Canyon Ranch, and it's so good to have you on this call.
Hi, Tom.
Hi.
A soul ache is when 2 days ago I had this soul ache. I woke up in the morning and I'd never felt this before. Now, I felt discombobulated and confused before? For sure, many times. But what was going on for me was this deep sense, like, remember the band Devo, which was based upon the premise of devolution as opposed to evolution.
Yeah.
I had this deep sense of devolution. Like, are we devolving as a species? And most specifically, is the United States devolving as, not as a place of American exceptionalism, because I don't necessarily believe in that, but as a place of people feeling like, God, we haven't gotten it right, but we're constantly with the intent of trying to get it right. And so the soul ache was the sense of like, maybe we haven't gotten it right. And we haven't gotten, actually, it wasn't even maybe, it was, we haven't gotten it right. And I'm not sure we will get it right.
Yeah.
So with that, so Tom, I'm going to actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to actually shift to my friend Eric Johnson. So Tom, I'm so glad you're here. First of all, it's great to see you. So here's our premise for the evening, which has shifted, and we'll talk a little bit more about it when I introduce Barbara in about 20 minutes from now. So originally it was this discussion about social justice was going to be a part of it, absolutely, as was the idea of personal and social transformation. To have the CEO of the largest personal growth retreat center in the United States, or frankly, maybe even the world, and someone who has been a social justice activist her whole life, and someone who was the CEO of a major college that focused on progressive values. Well suited for the evening tonight, but that was not the original plan. The original plan was a different topic. So in order to make this both topical and to be open to saying it's time to listen as opposed to just talk, I've invited a couple of our Modern Elder Academy alums to join us at the start of the show today, to just tell us their story and just tell their perspective. So we'll have Eric Johnson and Bruce Dixon give us their story, and then we'll converse a little bit with David. I'll bring David into the conversation, and we'll open it up to a broader conversation, because frankly today is less about us being the talking heads and more about a conversation focused on solutions, focused on not you asking us questions, but you offering solutions. All of us on this call, not just the people who are going to be the the main attractions. So I'm going to start by talking to Eric Johnson and letting him. Eric and I've known each other for more than 2 decades. He's an MEA alum, came here last December, and he and I have been conversing a lot in the last couple of days about what's been on his mind as an African American man who grew up in LA, and is addressing. He's addressing what a lot of us are addressing right now, but he addresses it every day. So Eric, take it away.
Sure. Hi there. Yeah, this has been a really interesting experience for me because I've been asked by a lot of friends and colleagues to speak on what my experience is with everything that's happening right now. And I'm just honored that people want to hear my opinion. So, thank you. And one of the things that a lot of people have been asking me, they're saying, I've heard at least 4 or 5 times, like, Eric, I'm not, I'm a middle class, upper middle class white person living in the Bay Area, and I have no connection to the African American community. In fact, you're probably the only Black person that I actually converse with on a regular basis. So I don't know I feel helpless. Like I can't do anything to stop racism. And it was an interesting experience for me to hear that at least 3 times from different people. And it's struck me as kind of a setup question or an easy out for somebody to ask a broader question, ask themselves a broader question that's unanswerable, which is the question of what can I do to stop racism, period. Well, if I knew that or anybody knew that, that would have been solved a long time ago. So it's sort of like an easy out to say, oh, well, I can't do anything that's in it all, so I'm out. I'll watch it on TV and go back to my life. And that got me thinking about really what is more important in this whole experience is asking a better question. I sell luxury real estate in San Francisco, so I'm always negotiating for a living and learning. And I've learned that if I ask a better question, I'll get a better answer. And if I get a better answer, I'm likely to get a better result for my clients and or for myself. So now I'm applying what I use to business every day to this very personal situation that's also a global situation. So there's all this clutter and all this noise about all the things that are happening, the rioters, the looters, the protesters, the president, but all these distractions or red herrings that are distracting us from the real question, the best question for right now, which I believe to be focused on the specific issue that is bubbled up to the surface right now, which is, I think, maybe even less about racism and more about process and procedure. So I invite people to ask a different kind of question, and I invite all of you to ask a different kind of question, not only of yourself, but to your friends, and just give them permission to fumble around, just like I'm fumbling around like right now. I'm not a professional speaker, but give them permission and yourselves to kind of wander through what some of the answers may be, so that we can come up with our own better solutions and apply this newfound awareness to our everyday lives or whatever, or whoever we may know that might be able to make a difference. So the question I have is, why would a police officer, a white police officer, lynch an unarmed, handcuffed Black man on a public street in front of witnesses, all while knowing his act of murder is being video recorded so that others can see? And that's really the heart of the question. And I believe that when we can answer this question, the answer to what we can do to help solve this problem will come to the surface, and it'll be evident. So kind of for my take on this and my answer that I came up with that most glaringly is that the reason why the police officer felt emboldened and confident enough to lynch an unarmed, restrained Black man in front of other people with recording is because the police officer trusts the system enough to let him get away with it. While behaving badly, you know, the system has protected officers like this for centuries. So why not now? So that begs the real question, which is not all this stuff about the protesters and the windows being broken and, you know, and that's not part of the mission and that's off message. All that is distractions from the real question that we need to solve here, which is police brutality and accountability. So what kind of systems do we have in place to make our police officers be held more accountable for their crimes and misdeeds, the same way you and I are held accountable for any crimes or misdeeds that we get involved in. You know, this officer has a record of complaints against him and has actually been written up or reprimanded or you know, at least I think 3 times for this behavior. Yet the way the system works, it actually protects and shields that officer and his or her record from public awareness. So, and then in some cases, in some jurisdictions, I've learned that their records are expunged or burned or locked away after 2 years. So that the public or whatever their history is, their bad history, can't even be traced. All while you and I and, you know, regular common folks around this country are, you know, if we commit a crime, our crimes are on our record for life. So I encourage you to open up a conversation with your friends that really speaks to the specific question that needs to be answered, which is what can we do? What can our politicians do? What can our police chiefs do to hold our officers more accountable for their actions when they behave badly?
Wow.
If we can answer that, we can eliminate a whole lot of this craziness, because we can't stop racism, but we can create a better system.
Beautiful. Eric, thank you. Thank you. We're going to come back to you in a moment. Let's see. Is Bruce on the line with us as well?
Bruce is on the line.
Bruce, there you go. So let me just introduce Bruce for a moment. So Bruce, Eric is a longtime friend and deeply love him. Bruce, I've only gotten to know over the last year because in the last 14 months, Bruce has been to the Modern Elder Academy 4 times.
Wow.
He is our most prolific graduate of the Modern Elder Academy, and he is a nomad. He's been all over the world for the last few years. And so let's hear Bruce's perspective on this subject, including the perspective of beyond the United States as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chip. Thanks, Eric. I'll start with beyond the US. Yeah, I've had the great fortune of traveling around the globe for the past 4 years. And I thought about that question earlier today, and I realized that, you know, my experiences over the last 4 years were really based on me really being a tourist. And what I mean by that is the longest duration that I would spend in any place was probably 2 months, which means that my interactions with most people abroad had very little to do with me interacting with them other than, in many ways, a transaction, right? I'm buying something, I'm renting something, I'm not looking for a job, I'm not trying to gain access to any institutions or anything along those lines. So, you know, my experience for the last 4 years, you know, is one that should be viewed more as a tourist, and I don't think really is that applicable to anything I've experienced in the US. So transitioning to sort of today and where I am, I think the biggest surprise for me, I've been back in the US for about 2.5 months. And the biggest surprise for me was that I wasn't surprised. I just wasn't surprised. Like, for me, this is a narrative that I've grown accustomed to. So the fact that there was someone who experienced what Mr. Floyd did wasn't a surprise to me. And I think that's one big thing to hear, is that for many of us, this is not a surprise. This is a narrative that has repeated itself time and time again. I think the other surprise for me after being away for 4 years and some of the things that I practiced, which I'd like to chat about, is I didn't feel this tremendous sense of hate for the perpetrators. It was really kind of the opposite. The opposite really was, I felt this deep sadness for everybody involved. And all of the many lives that were destroyed by this act. And it surprised me a little, but it did help me understand sort of the thing that I think, Eric, to your point, you know, I don't have the answers and I don't speak for anyone other than Bruce Dixon. But I think really the question is, for me, is not so much what can we do in terms of systems. I obviously think that's a part of it. But I think the more parochial question is, what can I do? What can Bruce Dixon do in the domain of his scope every single day? And it'll be interesting to hear from Barbara today, because in the past 4 years, I made a conscious decision. And that conscious decision was to practice what I know now is to be metta, or loving kindness, right? I made a decision 4 years ago because, Eric, I asked myself the question 4 years ago. You know, I'm kind of a person who follows like the Pareto principle or Pareto rule. Like, what is that one, or what are the 1 or 2 things that I can do that's going to give me the biggest bang for my desire to do the greatest good for humanity? And it was, for me, to develop a practice of loving kindness. And I only offer that from the context of, you know, the challenges we're facing are deep, ingrained patterns that have been sort of woven into the fabric of our neurological patterns, and they're not going to be glossed away by just rhetoric and some good thoughts. It's going to take a lot of conscious work to delve into the subconscious where most of our actions are derived. So this idea for me was really interesting in that while this event was horrific, for me, I'm at a place where I think any event of this kind to anyone is horrific. And for me, my response is everyone that I'm in contact with, everyone that I talk to, everyone that I interact with, can I practice something such that in a default way, it's for their well-being? So that would be the thing that I offer, and I'd love to hear Barbara's thoughts on that.
We are going to come to Barbara in a moment. But wow, Eric and Bruce, thank you. Eric, any thoughts on what Bruce just said? And I'm going to let the two of you have a quick dialogue if you would like to.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the place in which your responses spring from, Bruce. Loving kindness is really where we all should be springing from, in my opinion. But I too was not surprised when this first came out. In fact, I was I felt myself being a little dismissive of it, and I hate to say it, but yeah. I found, and maybe it was my heart trying to protect my fragile, emotions, and protect it by saying, you know what, Eric, this is no big deal. This happens all the time. But the truth is, I was texting my friend saying, a different day, same problem. And so many people are up in arms, which I'm happy about, that people are are feel impacted by the death of a Black man's life in America. I just wish that America could move beyond the surface pain, which is a reaction, and step up into a response mode, which is strategic and has a specific intent to actually correct a system as opposed to just soothe one's wound on the surface.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Eric. And I guess the only thing I would add, Chip, you mentioned you had a soul ache, and completely could appreciate that. And, you know, one of the things that has kind of helped me maintain my equilibrium has been, if you think about 3 weeks ago, there were so many people around the US who are saving people's lives because of the coronavirus who are not African American, right? There's so many lives being saved. There are so many people doing so many wonderful things every single day. Thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, even at this moment, who are not African American, who believe that Black lives matter. So for me, also, it's this balance of understanding, like, yeah, there are some things that we really need to solve. But at the same time, man, there's somebody in some hospital right now who's not African American, who's maybe saving someone's life. And to balance that with my belief that there's so much more of that happening than what we witnessed with Mr. Floyd. And keeping that in the front of our heads as well, because otherwise we could maybe make some decisions that may not be in the best interest of any of us, because we sort of overweight things without appreciating the enormity of what everybody's doing every day. And just quickly, there's a friend of mine, I got a message from, who's in the UK, and she's not African American, and some of the things that she and her family do every single day that no one will ever hear about, that support Black lives. Black Lives Matter. So I just said that in terms of a point of balance.
So first of all, let me just say, Eric and Bruce have never met each other. They both happen to be MEA alums. And it's such a joy to have over 750 alums who have are part of the community. But let me just say to both of you, first of all, thank you for, on a moment's notice, joining us. But let's also just say, speaking to what Bruce just said, the world is focused on a vaccine to this virus. And yet we have a virus that has existed for centuries in the United States and frankly in the world. And there's not a vaccine that is being invested in around this. Yes, absolutely, Bruce. There are people lots of people who are not people of color, who care about this, are investing time, money, energy, etc. But there's not a vaccine. And you know, as someone who's going to turn 60 later this year, I feel appreciative of the fact that I'm a high-risk class for COVID, and that they're focusing on vaccines for me because I'm a high-risk class. I also have cancer, and as someone who has cancer and just about turned 60, I'm high risk. If you're a person of color, and especially a Black man of color in the United States, you're high risk in a variety of ways that we as a society only seem to come to grips with when something tragic happens. I was talking, as I said earlier, with my friend who's a Trump supporter, someone who was a friend, he's a friend, Trump supporter. And I said to him, I said, Jeffrey, you and so many other people went all to the same university. And Jeffrey said, no, I went to University of Texas. All my friends went to like Ivy League schools. No, you all went to the same school. Where were you? Where were you? Where were you? The university of where were you when George Floyd didn't exist in the public consciousness? So I think that really one of the questions we need to ask ourselves is, how do we weave this into our lives, not because of a tragedy, but because it is who we are, no matter what our color of skin or the otherness that we bring to the table. So Eric and Bruce, thank you. You're staying on the line, and so many great people on the call right now. So I'm going to actually move to Barbara and bring up my brief script on Barbara. First of all, let me just say, Barbara, poor Barbara. The last couple of weeks have been challenging. You know, she thought I reached out to her to say, hey, join this happy hour. And she didn't know she was gonna be the guest, the main guest. And then she became the primary guest. She was the primary guest, but she didn't understand what I was asking for. Then Kripalu has had to go through its own existential crisis, as has been true of any hospitality business out there and personal growth retreat center. And yet Barbara has the conscious leadership, history, and social justice focus. She's been the CEO of a university focused on progressive values. And so I invite her to join us, not to be the guest speaker, but to sort of speak to this question of how do we address systemic justice issues? And Barbara, I'm going to let you say something first, and then I'll ask you a question. But let me just say, so a quick bio on Barbara: psychologist, adult educator, former president and CEO of Goddard College in Vermont. She joined Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health as CEO in 2016. And she has been in the process of helping to try to create some growing transformation there, with the premise that personal transformation can help create social transformation. She was named as one of the 50 influencers in aging in America in 2015 by PBS's Next Avenue. And she's also the grandmother of 5 children. Barbara, your thought.
Thank you. Thanks. First of all, it's great to be here. Eric and Bruce, I really appreciated what you had to say. And Eric was very provoked by really thinking about what the right questions are now. And I'm struggling with what the right questions are right now. What I will say is, you know, I was very touched when Chip and David decided to change the focus of this evening's conversation. I thought it was the right thing to do, given the realities that are happening in our world right now. So I am not here as a guest speaker or an expert. I really am feeling very deeply that what I need to be doing now is listening to that which needs to be heard and to that which I need to hear, as I am working to transform an organization, Kripalu, that needs to transform. We have a lot of work to do, and there's a lot that I need to listen to right now. So I appreciate that we've all been able to be nimble. I hope that you can pivot with me in this. I was very much looking forward to the conversation, but really believe that what we're talking about now is what needs to be talked about and what I need to hear about. And I'll be happy to come back at any other time when it's more appropriate to have the conversation that we thought we were going to have. But it's a privilege to be here right now and to be a participant in this conversation.
I think, perfect, Barbara. I think David has one question for you, though, that
Great.
we'd love to help start maybe the rest of the evening on, so we can all think this way. David,
Great.
do you have that question? If you don't, I do.
Oh, here you go. Oh,
There he
I
is.
was unmuted.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just pondering what Eric and Bruce were saying.
Well, talk about that, David, for a minute first, even just as well.
I think this has just been, you and I spoke on Tuesday, Chip, and we were both like, I was wrecked. I'm not usually like that. And like what I've seen happen, I guess what's touched me about what's going on is the level of, sort of what Bruce was saying, the level of compassion that I'm seeing. I find incredibly moving. That like, I just, what I'm seeing out there, what I'm feeling is very, very, I mean, this is my sort of third, so I was around in 68, I'm that old. You know, Rodney King, 92, and this is very, very different. Mm-hmm. It's global. It's intergenerational. It's a lot of white people. And there's a sense of shared compassion that is very different from what my memory of these other protest uprising events that have happened in the past. I think we're like at a pivot in history, and it's incredibly moving for me. It's just really emotional. But anyway, my question. So Barbara, how do we cultivate hope of change when it feels like there are these bigger forces that are out there working against us? What do you say to that?
Yeah. So first, what I want to say, David, is I hope we're at a pivotal moment of change. I really do. We need to be at a pivotal moment of change. And let me just say that in my response, I'm really speaking personally at how I'm coming to this. I want to say I haven't been this hopeful in a really long time. People are out protesting that which we should never tolerate. People are in the streets. I find tremendous hope in that action. The last time I felt this way was when the Occupy movement got started, and I thought, yes, the young people are going to lead the way. Unfortunately, that wasn't the revolution I was hoping for. But I haven't been this hopeful in a long time. I've been thinking a lot about, my practice. I think a lot about yoga and meditation, and, the pause in yoga and meditation is the breath, really, between reaction or reactivity and response. It's like that breath, that pause, where we become like aware in the moment, present awareness. We become aware, we cultivate awareness with that breath. And I've been thinking about that a lot, as here we are in the midst of this pandemic that has caused a big pause. We are paused in our homes, for the most part, diverted from the daily routines of our lives that very much, many of us engage sort of unconsciously, right? We're managing life and we go about our daily routines, not in the same way that we are in that moment of pause, right? So here we are, diverted in a moment of pause, right? At the same time that people are at risk, financially, economically, layoffs, unemployment, and social media brings into our house the murder of, right, George Foley. And it's like the confluence of these things has come together for, in some ways, what I think of as a much needed response. People are in the streets saying, this has to stop. And I find that really hopeful. And I think it would not necessarily have happened if we were in our daily routines and we weren't in this moment of pause, with all kinds of things building because of that, right? So that's one thing I think about, but it makes me hopeful that the ingredients are ripe for something to happen. I was also very happy and inspired and encouraged when former President Obama said, keep the protests up, let's make leaders uncomfortable. And people can do that now. So then I think about, there are always bigger forces, right, working against transformation. I encounter them in my own practice, right? Like you think about a discipline, there are always the forces working against or counter to transformation, the personal level and at the systemic level. And I think what we need to be more than mindful of, I think what we really need to own, which we have not, is the fact that systems, human systems of oppression, are designed and maintained and sustained by human beings. They don't live separately from us, but we talk about them as though they do, and we get overwhelmed by that. But in fact, human beings create and sustain and maintain those systems. It is going to take human beings to dismantle those systems. Systems do not exist separately from us. And I believe that those of us who have greater privilege and power in our society need to be the ones willing to take the greater risks in being more upfront to dismantling those systems, particularly now. I've been thinking a lot about my own overwhelmedness. I've really been sort of practicing sort of my meditation practice around my feeling overwhelmed. And, you know, that's why I appreciated like, oh, right questions. That's a really good anchor. But I've been thinking a lot about how being overwhelmed becomes its own diversion, its own sort of unconsciousness, right? So we get overwhelmed and we kind of go into unconsciousness. And I think that now is the time where each and every one of us actually needs to do the work, the disciplined work of riding our own wave, right, of overwhelmness, and staying clear, grounded, and conscious. And I think there are many different ways that we can do that, but I think a disciplined practice so that we don't go unconscious right now, because chaos has a way of making us unconscious, right? Think about what happens. We start to tune things out. At the same time, there is this moment of pause, of breath, right? Where something else can happen. Something can happen with awareness. I mean, maybe it leads us to the questions we need to be asking. Maybe it leads us, the discipline practice, to a loving kindness, a compassion. Swami Kripalu used to talked a lot about observation without judgment in order to be able to come to right action. I think that is what is needed now. And so for me, it is about staying conscious, staying aware, recognizing the moment and what is happening in this moment, and then also recognizing my own connection to that which exists. And I'm part of the sustaining of that. I have to be part of the dismantling of that. But I am feeling more hopeful right now than I have felt in a long time.
Thank you, Barbara.
Yeah.
Wow, that is beautiful. We are also fortunate to have, so Kripalu's just a beacon of light, but also a place of in process. It's a work in progress.
Yes.
When it comes to social justice. I've been on the board. I was on the board for 8 years at the Esalen Institute, and surprise guest, we have Cheryl Frenzel, who is the director of programming for the past decade or more there. She's been there for a long time. She's really, frankly, rooted in the soul of the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, the first well-known personal growth retreat center in the United States that opened 58 years ago. And I just wanted to, Cheryl's an MEA alum as well, and I wanted to just give her the opportunity to say a couple of things about Esalen and about personal growth retreat centers and what they're struggling with in terms of the white privilege that happens at the personal growth retreat centers of the United States. And Cheryl, are you there?
I'm totally here.
Love it. Yay!
I firstly want to say what an honor it is to be here with everybody, and especially the people that have spoken so far. It's really good to hear your voices. And Barbara, I'm a fan of yours. When I saw that you were speaking, I texted Chip and I said, "Oh, yay!" She is a good one. You're a wonderful leader. And I also had a back and forth with Chip about, I'm not sure what profound thing I can possibly say. And I don't actually think I have a profound thing to say, because the truth of the matter is many retreat centers, while wonderful places for personal growth and healing, and Esalen in particular likes to focus on consciousness, raising consciousness. This is something we're deeply struggling with, and the answers aren't easy, and it's mostly around accessibility, and also being a place where everybody feels comfortable, safe, seen, included. And I think at Esalen we're just starting to scratch the surface of that, and starting to have some tougher conversations, because we're not no path is clear, I have to just loop back into what I'm continuing to hear people say in this forum and frankly in other forums. Is like, listen, 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 listen. And I think why I really admire you, Barbara, is because I do think listening is all of our responsibility, and it's really appreciated when it's modeled at the top. That doesn't mean that people on the front lines, you know, don't have a lot to do with instigating change. Indeed, they certainly do. But to have that infused, diversity and inclusion infused in the values of an organization really makes a difference. So yeah, I watch us look at how do we reach out to new audiences. And for me in our center, I don't know, Barbara, what yours is. For me, it's partnership. And we kind of have to, the process we're in right now is working with a consultant to just take a look at ourselves. Where are we not including others? Merely, we're a shared sleeping facility. Many of our accommodations are shared. That asks, are you male or female? And that actually isn't very inclusive. And so we're in the process of looking at that among many other layers and going through that self-reflection. How are we as an organization set up to receive all people and make sure all people feel welcome? Yeah, so anyway, so Chip and I had a back and forth. It's like, well, I don't have any answers, Chip. I know people here care a whole lot about this, and
yeah, but Cheryl, the fact that you are focused on the questions, maybe that is one of the key themes of the evening, is not necessarily having the answers, but actually exploring the questions. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it.
Well, and also I just have to say, because exploring the questions and listening and all those things are lovely. And I think what some people were speaking to around the hopefulness is like, I'm feeling some shaking beyond immobility to actual real action.
Yes.
Our own personal development plans about how am I, as the director of programs, going to institute change through action, not just caring and not just listening. So where is that first foothold?
Right. Beautiful. And that actually is the question for the evening. We're now going to open it up for everybody who's on the call to, in the chat room. You're welcome to raise your hand if you want to actually talk to this. But the question for the evening is, how do we cultivate hope of change when it feels like there are bigger forces working against that transformation? In essence, this question of the system, and how do we keep that hope alive? How do we engender that sense of wanting to make a change in our own world when it feels like there's something that actually is bigger than what we have power over or have influence over? So I'm going to open it up to Laura. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, David. And open it up to just see, how do we have a conversation about this for the next 15 minutes? So some of you who have actually put lots of thoughts in the chat already, feel free to raise your hand or say, hey, here's a question I'd like to, or here's a thought I have. Or if there is the hand raising function here, hopefully Laura can see that. So Laura, I'm going to pass it on to you.
Thank you. So if anyone has questions, put them in the chat box, and Anne-Marie and I will keep up with the questions. And if you have a question specific to one of our speakers, if you could put that in the chat box. But we are getting some feedback. There's Neuro Leadership Institute has a powerful offering for training to mitigate bias as one option. Diane Murray suggesting power has to start local, what you can do.
Is Linda, I think Linda Grubbs is somewhere there, and I would love to have her voice here. If Linda, if you have anything you'd like to add based upon what you've heard so far. Linda is an MEA alum twice, and she's been leading diversity and inclusion efforts at MEA, and she's got a really interesting perspective on things. And she was going to write a blog post for us, and I think is so verklempt by what we're dealing with right now that she's like, I don't even know what to do. So Linda, do you have a voice? This is your opportunity to say something if you'd like.
Yeah, Chip, it was more than being verklempt, and I'll just have to say that today was a really, really difficult day for me. I sat and watched the funeral of George Floyd and was doing relatively well until as part of the funeral, they had people stand in silence for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and it destroyed me. It was just really, really difficult to think that someone could do that to another human being. My post was going to be about being an angry Black woman. And I was coming from that perspective because I get that feedback a lot when I push back against what's normal for most people, both professionally and with my friends. One of the things that was really, I think what really triggered me today was I grew up across the street from a precinct. And many a nights I witnessed firsthand police brutality in all sorts of forms, and it was basically against Black and brown people. And seeing what happened to George really triggered me. So trying to get out of that head of being triggered and, you know, shifting that focus, I was aligned with Bruce to a certain extent, where I had to go back to my practice of meditation and sitting still. I really had to go inward. And then after going inward, the question to myself was, how can I help others learn? How can I help others sit in my place, sit in my shoes, from an emotional perspective? I think anyone who heard that man cry for his mother got it. Anyone who saw it got it. So how do you shift all of that and all of that energy, that positive energy, for the most part, that's out in the field? And I think it boils down to some very simple things. I put in the chat that you have to really reach out to those of us that are other. It could be something as simple as walking into a room, seeing a person of color, just saying hello. We want to be seen. We want to be engaged. We want to be, you know, acknowledged. It makes us feel inclusive. The other thing that I would say is, if you all think back to what we learned in MEA, it's about having a growth mindset, you know, really pushing yourself to learn about people of color. There was a post earlier, I think Jen sent, that had some great resources. I will, think I will still write that post, scale it back some wonderful resources that I think people can look at. The first thing that I would say is there's a wonderful book called White Fragility. Robin DiAngelo, excellent book. And what I like about this book is that it really, I think, gives people an inside look, as much as one can, who's not a person of color, to the kinds of things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. But when I talk about a growth mindset, it's really thinking about where that flow is, right? Where you fit in that flow and stepping into the discomfort. Yes, people are going to say the wrong things. Yes, you might not be talking because you don't really know what to say. But I think for myself, and I can go out on a limb here, I think for a lot of people of color, they would just appreciate the effort. You can simply start out by saying, you know, I really don't know what to say, but I want you to know that I'm here and I stand with you. And coming at someone, a person of color, in that space, really diffuses any kind of situation, takes away any defensiveness, and it opens up that dialogue. So if you have that kind of growth mindset and move towards that area of discomfort, it can really help. And lastly, what I'll just say is, I think it was Barbara who said it earlier today, you know, think about, I think everyone might have said this from their own perspective. Think about what you can do from where you stand, from where you sit, from an individual perspective, because it's systemic. You know, it's where you work, it's where you go to school, it's where you shop, it's everywhere. So if you can just own your piece of it and step into that and look at your systems, your procedures, to Eric's point, and see what, if anything, you are doing that contributes to systemic racism, or on the opposite side, what are you currently doing to help people that are out there suffering, that are marching, that are saying, hey, we're here, listen to us. I think if we can look at it from that perspective, step by step, owning your own piece, of course, there's opportunities to have influence in other areas as well. But you start one by one, and you'll find that there's a whole community of people. There's a rainbow coalition that's standing with you. So I'd like to just stop there.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Linda. Love you.
Thank you, Chip, for giving me this space, because I tell you, it's really lifted my spirits to see people and to hear what people have to say. It's been really good for me. So I want to say thank you to you, and thank you to my community as well.
Laura, back to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Linda. Masharika Maddison is with us, and she wrote a beautiful comment in the chat box, and you may want to elaborate on this, but she wrote, hope is an ember, vision is the wind that stokes the flame of change. Knowing the distinction between complexity and complication, and asking lots of questions to get at the difference as we parse out the dismantling of anti-racist system is key. Well said. I don't know if you wanted to add to that, Masharika.
Hey.
To each of you, I love the time that I'm in this community, and thank you to Eric and to Bruce for the ways in which, through your teaching, you in some way, shape, or form potentially relive trauma. And I wish you all of the love right back to you that you are giving out to so many.
For those who haven't seen Masharika's Wisdom Well post from yesterday, it's exquisite, and she's an MEA alum, and this is, you know, one of the things I just want to say, this woman's in her 30s still, and it helps us to realize that the definition of elder is broad. It is about how have you cultivated and harvested your wisdom. And Masharika, you cultivate and harvest your wisdom in ways that I wish I had in my 30s. So, thank you.
We have a question from Hamida Sanawala. I would like to ask, for those who are feeling what I am, how are you dealing with the anger inside? Anger and sadness about what happened with George Floyd, but on the other hand, also about people using violence and looting to take away from the message of the peaceful protests and Floyd's family message of peace and prayer. Good question.
Eric, Bruce, Linda, Masharika, anybody else?
There I am. Can I can answer that one?
That'd
Please.
be great.
Well, I actually, there are two sides to this equation about the looting that's happening. And I remember when the Rodney King incident happened, and I was in LA in law school and in the middle of my final exams, and the military there was a tank literally on my street corner where I live. And I was reacting like, what is all this looting? They're making us look like we're criminals and blah, blah, blah. But I'm experiencing this uprising differently now, because really what the system, I'll just call it that for now, would really love to maintain is a system where they can do anything they want to Black folks, verbally, education-wise, opportunity-wise, and physically. They can own our bodies, they can beat us down, and they can kill us. But God dang it, if you go out and bust a window at a store, just, you know, in retaliation or because you didn't know what else to do, you're even, you know, then they're all of a sudden shaming us for reacting to their violent act in the first place. So I would encourage people to focus less on the spontaneous combustion kind of reaction that people may feel from frustration and maybe lack of power. And so this was a way that they can demonstrate it in this moment. And instead of focusing on that, focus on the bigger thing, which is the question is, why does the system support the killing and murder of innocent? Or sometimes they're not innocent. Maybe they have committed a crime, but the crime is not worth killing for. How come our system is supporting and allowing these people to kill unarmed Black people in America? And focus on that violent act, which that dead life cannot be recovered and brought back. A window, these businesses have insurance, and these windows are going to be reinstalled, and businesses for the most part are going to go on. So it's a red herring that I find is pulling us away from the real message or focusing on the real question, the better question that's actually going to fix the problem. And all it does is encourage us to point at another problem. It's a distraction from what my true mission is.
Linda, did you want to say something as well?
Yeah,
Thank you, Eric.
I want to add on to that, Eric. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's clearly a red herring. And I in no way condone violence at all. But I would ask everyone to put yourselves in the shoes of someone who is younger, because let's face it, it's a lot of young folks out there. They have control over their hormones to, you know, one degree to the next. But it's a system that people are hungry, people are looking for work, people are seeing that the money is not trickling down, it's going to those people that, you know, that 1-2% that still have it. And this is their form of expression. I don't agree with it, but I understand it. And to Eric's point, I, for one, am really careful about the media that I look at and listen to, because, you know, there are other forces out there that are at work to take away from that message that another Black man, another person of color has died in this country. So I appreciate that perspective, Eric. Thank you for saying that.
So Chip, can I add a comment?
Yes, please, Bruce.
So just quickly, I want to push back on something you said earlier. You said earlier that, you know, for the coronavirus, there are companies now who are racing for a vaccine. And for racism, you said you didn't think that there was a vaccine. And I'd say I don't think that's necessarily true.
Actually, I said I don't think people are investing in the vaccine.
I don't think that's true either.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Meaning there are people like Barbara and others who are working day in and day out to help people with what I would call a vaccine, and that is compassion. It's been talked about. We talk about it. Maybe we're looking for something very esoteric. Maybe we're looking for something. But if everyone chose to look out for the other in terms of alleviating their suffering, then we wouldn't have some of the challenges. So I do think there's a way. That's one. And number two is 8 minutes and 46 seconds. So if there's something that we could do, I would invite us to take 8 minutes and 46 seconds a day for the next 6 months and expand our circle of compassion, right? That can start, a process of changing at a neurological level, maybe some patterns that we've allowed to exist. Just a thought.
Oh, thank you, Bruce. Laura, I know we are over our time, and I'm going to let you sort of you and David wrap up and talk about where we go from here. But guys, we could go on for a couple hours here, I'm sure. All I can say is to Eric, Bruce, Barbara, Linda, Masharika, Lisa, who gave the blog post today, Dr. Lisa Fitzpatrick. Thank you for your voices. Laura, I turn it over to you and to David.
Well, David, who do we have? What date are we coming back?
2 weeks.
2 weeks, June 18th.
Yeah.
And we were going back and forth, all of us, talking about what charity to donate to after this evening's programming. So if you have the means to do so, we would ask that you donate to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and I will put that in the chat box. Everyone, thank you so much for this evening. All of your contributions, feedback. I mean, I'm personally touched. Barbara, thank you for reminding me to get back to my breath and taking that pause moment. Bruce, Eric, I'm so touched. And appreciate everyone coming together tonight. And Chip and David, thank you so much for being agile to mixing it up tonight and changing it and getting all the right people in the room and working together to bring a message to our community that I think everyone wanted to have this conversation tonight.
Sometimes it's just not about us.
Yeah.
No, no. But thank you. Thank you. You guys, really, this was a sobering hour.
Yeah.
For sure.
It was definitely a sober hour, not a happy hour necessarily, and very different than 2 weeks ago when we were talking about UFOs. David, any last thought?
This has been really moving. The whole week has been moving. Eric, Bruce, Linda, I just want to speak for myself. I'm a straight white guy. And I find this whole thing like really intense. The thing, I don't have a lot of control over systems. Systems are bigger than me. I'm not a macro guy. What I have control over is my mind, my way of thinking. I have control over what I look at. I have control over my personal actions. And I can choose to go into the world with openness and optimism and curiosity. I can choose to approach other people in that spirit or not. That's my choice. And to me, the change happens little bits at a time. It's individuals doing little things. And that's, to me, a lot of people doing a lot of little stuff makes a big change. I told you I'm gonna lose it on this. I'm sorry, I'm done.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just say add one little quick thing?
Yes, Eric.
One thing that I would encourage people to do, and that what we can do, is we can hire more Black people to work in our businesses and our companies, and more Black people who are outside contractors and consultants. The more we bring all of our community into the work that we do, the more integrated everything becomes, and the more aware and more exposure everyone gets to each other, and there's less fear of the other, and we become more of a cohesive community. And I think however we can invite and make the other feel safe and competent and capable, and that they are being brought in because of their capabilities and not because we're giving them a gift or a bonus because it makes me feel better about myself. That's a big, big way to make a difference.
And I will finish by just saying to everyone on the call, let's take a lesson from Eric on his wall. Go out and be amazing. All right. Thank you. Thanks to everybody.
Thank you, Chip.
Beautiful.
Thanks, Chip.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chip.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Everybody be safe out there.
Thank
Love
you.
and blessings.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everybody, and take care.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Oh, Eloisa from Brazil. Thank you, Eloisa. Good to have you here.
All these comments are awesome.
Yeah.
I appreciate that you take it to crying in public.
We like you crying in public, David.
It's
listen,
terrible.
Listen, it's all, you were teased in high school because, you know, you were the sensitive one. And now, you know, here you go. You're just you're the weird guy. And we love you as the straight, white, older, weird guy.
Yeah.
Yay.
I'm the other.
You've become the other as the crying older white man. Yes. So.
All right. Thank you. See you guys later.
All right.
All right.
Bye, Eric. Thank you. All right. Well, we have a handful of people still on the call, but let's all just say goodbye to each other and
Yeah.
do a deep breath and just say yes. Thank you so much,
Thank
Linda. Linda sending me a private message. Thank you, Linda, to you for joining us. And I forgot to mention Cheryl. I don't think she's still on the phone, but Cheryl from Esalen, when I was saying my thank yous, thanks to her as well, because that was a last minute addition. All right, guys, I'm going to jump off.